So, season 1, episode 5 of The Rings of Power continues the downward trend. I think that the show's gotten worse pretty much since episode 3. Each episode has been worse than the last. The only part of... There's two things I liked about this episode, and we'll get those out of the way first. I liked the Harfoot storyline. I liked the song that Poppy sung. It felt very Tolkien-esque. Maybe the most Tolkien thing about this whole show so far, of course, is the song. I liked Nori sort of teaching the stranger about her culture and about the migration. I thought all of that was really good. And then other than the kind of crappy CGI of the wolves that attack them, I enjoyed that whole sequence where the stranger saves Nori and Poppy and Malva from the wolves and uses magic to do it. He sort of slaps his arm down, creates this big shockwave that scares off the wolves. Then he has to heal because he's bruised his arm up, and Nori finds him with his arm in a pool, and it's starting to ice over. And she kind of stupidly touches his arm with her hand. He's not responsive to anything she's saying. He's like in a trance. And then the ice starts going, up her arm, and she freaks out. And his chanting gets louder and louder, and he's speaking in a strange language. And then she gets hurled back when the ice breaks, and she's all freaked out and terrified. Moments before he was kind of the hero of the day. Now she doesn't know what to think. But she kind of put herself in this position, and I think this is more red herring stuff, right? Trying to make us think, oh, he's evil, but he's not actually doing anything evil. This wasn't an evil act. He wasn't doing anything to Nori on purpose. He was in a trance, and he just had saved them. So clearly I think they're just messing with us, trying to keep that mystery box boxed up for a little bit longer. The other part of the episode that I liked continues to be the Elrond and Durin friendship. This had some more poignant and even kind of funny buddy humor, and I enjoyed that. Unfortunately, it was part of a storyline that I'm not a fan of. There are three, outside of the Harfoots, there are essentially three storylines. The Elrond and Durin storyline has been dealing with Mithril, right? Gil-galad sent Elrond to help Celebrimbor. Then Elrond went to the dwarves to ask for assistance in building this forge and discovered Mithril. Well, it turns out that Gil-galad and Celebrimbor already knew about Mithril. Now, it's possible that they've been, told about this by Sauron or Anatar or whoever, and that's why all of this seems so convoluted. But just bear with me here. It doesn't make any sense. So they actually, it turns out they actually sent Elrond to discover Mithril, which they already knew about, right? They didn't tell Elrond this. They deceived him, but I don't really know why. Then we have Gil-galad basically demanding that Elrond breaks his sacred oath to a friend, which isn't a very cool thing to have someone do, especially because he already knows that there's Mithril there. So we'll get to the concept of Mithril in this show. Well, actually, let's just do that now. Mithril is portrayed as this, as containing the light of the Valar. There's this made-up story about, it's not part of Tolkien's lore at all, about an elf fighting a Balrog, and, the power of these two forces, entered this tree, and then went down into the ground and created this rare ore called Mithril that contains, this, the light of the Silmarils, basically, which is, I think, kind of silly. I mean, it's an okay concept, but the idea that it's, partially the Balrog energy is really, really odd. And the fact that they're just making this up wholesale, I understand, ignoring parts of the lore or changing them a little, but this is kind of a major, major, major change. And then it's forced into this storyline in a really awkward way. Apparently, the elves, their light is fading. They need to be saved by something, and they think it's got to be the Mithril. They're going to be able to, use the Mithril to save the elven light in the Second Age. Because it has the light of the Silmarils in it or something. It's like taking Tolkien's myths and legends and sort of hacking them up and putting them back in the oven. It's very odd. But the worst part is that they need it by spring. It's kind of like how he needed to build the forge by spring. It's like the elves have been around for thousands of years, but now, if we don't get it by spring, elves don't even operate on a timeline like that. It's so silly. It's so just abstract. But worse than anything is just how Gil-galad goes about this, through deception, and trickery, when he could have just gone to Durin and said, "Hey, Lord or Prince Durin, King Durin, whichever one of the two Durins he's talking to, we're all gonna die. We're gonna perish. Our light is going to fade. Could you please help us out? We know you've gotten Mithril. You don't need to keep it a secret. We will pay you for it with our elven goods that you desire. Let's do some trade." That's all that had to happen. This is all like politicking and skullduggery for no reason. And it doesn't really fit the character of Gil-galad or any of these characters. And then you have Elrond breaking his oath. And the only way that any of this is redeemed is the nice conversation that Elrond and Durin have afterwards. Stealing the show once again. There's some fun humor. Durin, is very pleased that the fate of the elves is in his hands. Whose hands? Anyways, that's all great, but boy, they got to it in the worst way possible. And I just don't understand why. Why make these characters seem so scummy? Gil-galad is a heroic figure, but I feel like outside of just a couple characters, they're doing their damned best to make everybody unlikable and unpleasant as possible. Which brings us to Númenor. I would actually say Galadriel is slightly less insufferable this episode because she's a little bit less angry. But overall, the Númenorian storyline is messy, unpleasant, and it's both rushed and slow at the same time. It's probably the worst storyline of all of them. Although the Southlands is vying for top dog here. Galadriel has convinced, with the help of the tree petals, Mithril and Al-Pharazôn to send 5 ships and 500 men, which seems like a tiny force, but 5 ships and 500 men to help fight for the Southlands against, I don't know, they don't know how many orcs are there. This is all just being, this whole war is just being rushed ahead against a force. You got to understand, Galadriel has not encountered for hundreds or thousands of years, has met a man on a shipwreck in the middle of the ocean who she doesn't know, and has now taken his word for it that there are orcs in the Southlands. But we don't know how many, we don't know who, we don't know anything, but somehow Muriel's committing her whole entire army. Well, okay, 500 men. I hope that's not the whole Númenorian army. But she's committing a force to go to Middle-earth, go to the Southlands, and fight for this guy that nobody knows. For Galadriel, who's an elf that nobody likes. That's what feels rushed about all of this. Like, we're just moving straight to war, without any real character development along the way. The character development we do get is Isildur being like everybody's whipping boy, basically. His friends are, especially the one friend of, we'll call him V. I can't remember how to pronounce his name, and I don't want to look it up. Valendil, something like that. He's really, really angry still at Isildur for letting a rope slip and then getting them all kicked out of the Sea Force, the Sea Guard, whatever. It's absurd. It's such a contrived conflict between these characters. It must have been weird to act those scenes out. Like, how can you be this mad? He's so mad, and he's such a dick to Isildur. And then Elendil, Isildur's dad, is also such a huge dick to Isildur, acting like he's just done the worst thing in the world, and now he can have no redemptive acts to bring him back into the fold. So Isildur has to stow away, and that's when he encounters Kemen, the Al-Pharazôn's son, who along with Isildur's sister is trying to sabotage the war effort. Which they haven't really established completely why they're so against it, but I mean, I don't blame them at the same time. It seems like a very foolish, rushed kind of plan. I mean, it's not even a plan. They don't even have a plan. They're just going to sail over to this area they don't know anything about and hope that they're not, that they don't encounter 50,000 orcs with their 500 men. So one thing leads to another, and 2 of the ships burn, and now they only have 3 ships. This is a nation who chants the sea is always right and has apparently this amazing fleet, but they only have 5 ships. I don't know. All of Númenor to me feels like a Las Vegas casino. That's what it feels like, the version of Númenor that you would put in a Vegas casino, like the Venetian or Caesar's Palace. That it feels too small and artificial. for all the money that Amazon has spent on this, Númenor just doesn't feel real. Like, I don't get the sense of this being like the grandest city in the whole world. Like, it just feels like, you know, whenever there's a crowd of people, like when Alfarazon's speaking to the crowd, he's like, those elves are taking our jobs. Like, there's like 50 people. It's just, oh boy. So all we get in Númenor is like arguing, bickering, characters that seem weak or unpleasant. Isildur and Elendil both feel just absolutely neutered. And then we have this scene with Galadriel fighting against 5 like sailors who don't even really know how to sword fight. The whole thing comes off as like a dance routine from a Broadway show. It's not badly choreographed. It just doesn't feel very realistic. And I know it's a fantasy, yada yada yada. But we've got a fly in here. It just doesn't. You know, there's moments where they seem to pause and not attack her just to make the choreography work. I can't talk today. Finally, we will come to the Southlands, where Bronwyn has inexplicably become the leader of the Southlands. She gives a rousing speech to her people, who are like 3 villages worth of farmers and peasants, apparently, where she says, I know I am not the king that you've been waiting for. And it's like, yeah, no shit, you are a healer lady. Like, what? Why are you in charge all of a sudden? The problem here is just that they don't earn this moment. You know, like Bronwyn's a fine character. She, you know, maybe in a couple seasons of development, she could have become the leader of these people. But what I don't understand is, you know, at the end of the 2nd episode, it felt like they were going to be leaving, like escaping to get away from the orcs and get away from this threat. And I thought, well, maybe we'll have, you know, an adventure out of this. We've got the healer lady. We've got the elven archer. We got the weird kid with the magic sword. You know, we got the old grumpy dude who seems like a Nazi sympathizer. You know, maybe this will be an interesting story as they try to flee from these orcs. But instead, they're holding up in this tower. None of them know how to fight. They're following a lady who makes potions and an elf who nobody likes. I think Arendir's fine. He's a little bit emo, but he's fine. But none of the Southlanders like him. So I guess it makes sense that half of them leave and go pay homage to Adar. Adar, meanwhile, is like an interesting character, but he comes across as a little bit of a cartoon villain this episode. You know, I also don't quite understand why orcs have skin that bubbles and crackles and burns under the sun. That's not how orcs work. They're treating them like maybe like vampires or trolls or something. Orcs don't like the sun, and they're more, I would say, I guess, more powerful at night. And they avoid the sunlight, but they don't like burn up to a crisp in it. That's just silly. Orcs would be a lot less threatening if they were that vulnerable to daylight. Anyway, so some of the villagers go and pay homage to Adar, and he has the Waldreg, the old guy, basically kill Rowan. We don't see it, but it's a blood sacrifice. Back at the camp, Theo shows Arendir the sword hilt, and they discover that it's a key, and this magic key, and so the mystery of the sword becomes the mystery of the key. Like, what is this key for? Like, what does it do? What, you know? So, lots of mysteries still. We have still not learned about most of them, or they have deepened. Still no rings, still no Sauron. But we're rushing to war, and apparently also the tunnels that the orcs were digging are finished. So the timelines are just, who knows? We have, you know, what appears to be just a few days in Númenor versus, I can only imagine those ditches, they're not really tunnels, it would take months to dig. Traveling between Linden and Khazad-dûm must be weeks of journeying, and it looked like the Harfoots in the little montage of the map, which I enjoyed quite a bit while Poppy was singing. That looks like it must have taken weeks. So maybe Númenor has also taken weeks. It's just hard to get a sense of time in some of these storylines. Both the Southlands and Númenor seem like not much has happened, but clearly some time has passed. This is just another problem with the show's writing. You know, it's not grounding us in a sense of time and distance for all the storylines. Like, again, that scene with the Harfoots, that they did a really good job sort of showing where the caravan had gone and giving us that sense of like struggling through the bog and going through the dark forest, like all of that. And again, I know some people just hate the Harfoots, but I think that storyline is the most Tolkien-esque of all of them. That and the Elrond and Durin friendship, again, very Tolkien-esque. Everything else feels very like Hollywood, like Amazon throwing money at it so that they can have their own, Helm's Deep scene, right? We got Bronwyn rousing the troops that aren't troops, the peasants, to fight against the orc hordes, and it's very Helm's Deep, and they want to have their big battle, but they don't want to earn it. They don't want to earn any of this. So that's where I'm at with episode 5. I think, the good stuff is very badly outweighed by the bad. And, even in the good stuff, even in the good parts, you got such awful CGI for those wolves. Just a lot of it just feels cheap, and it shouldn't feel cheap. I still like the score. I think the music's great. I think the writing is really suffering just because of the writing. So, all right, let me know what you think of episode 5, what you thought of it in the comments. And thank you for liking and subscribing and being just phenomenally beautiful people. And I will see you next time. Peace.